nice to be here. Thank you for having me, and um, such an important work that you're doing, and that the whole community here that's joined together is so passionate about.
And tell us, what is the name of the organization that you're with? And tell us briefly, introduce your organization.
Sure, yes. My name is Dr. Belinda Hernandez Arriaga, and I'm with the program of Ayudando Latinos a Soñar. It's a Latino-led organization that I founded in 2011 to work with farm worker children, Latino families, first-generation children, youth in agriculture, farm workers themselves. And we've spent a good part of this last couple of years working with newcomers and asylum-seeking families here on the coast side, in collaboration with some amazing organizations from around all of Northern California, University of San Francisco, the Bay Area Border Relief, and ALAS. We're very honored to be here with all of you tonight.
Tell us a little bit about your role and the NAMI.
Certainly. Good evening. Thank you for having me here. My name is Catherine Murphy, and I am the Director of Programs at NAMI Palm Beach County, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI is a national organization. We have hundreds of affiliates throughout the country. I represent Palm Beach County, and we provide education, advocacy, and support to people who are living with mental health conditions, but also to their families. We provide free classes and support groups, presentations, outreach, a lot of various services through Palm Beach County, the state, and the country.
All right, thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Vasilia Banenstock. I'm a therapist in private practice in Palm Beach Gardens. And like Rolando said, I've done a lot of work with NAMI and some work with Compass. And I'm in the Compass Business Alliance, the Pride Business Alliance as well. My practice focuses on treating adults with childhood trauma, anxiety, and relationship issues. And I also teach in the graduate programs at Florida Atlantic University and Northwestern University, and serve on the board of Vida Nova, which is a wonderful organization locally that helps homeless youth, many of whom are LGBTQ or coming out of foster care. So thank you so much.
So yes, I'm the founder and producer of Movies Making a Difference with my co-founder, Chip Williams, right next to me. And we make socially conscious movies highlighting the injustice of human trafficking, child brides, child labor, child slavery, and spiritual abuse in the United States. And then all the proceeds from the films and charitable events all go back to directly aid the survivors upon whom the films shed light.
Chris Pasquale, I'm the Director of Operations for Rico Intensive. It's an outpatient program located in downtown Delray Beach. We've been around for about 8 years. We do mental health and substance abuse clinical treatment. What really kind of drives us is really helping the clients to re-engage life. A lot of them are younger, who've never really kind of grown up. And so we do our best to try to teach them to grow up. And to engage with their meaning and their purpose. Who are they? Why are they here? And where are they going? Our groups are one of the groups that I'm a trained therapist, and one of the groups that I focus on is the hero's journey. We look at a lot of myths and stories and try to encourage them to kind of get in touch with who they are, to really find that purpose so that they can do something different with their lives. We found that a lot of young people really just don't know who they are. They don't know who they are, and even in the time that we're in, it's even harder to figure out who you are. So that's what we do.
I'm Chip Williams, and I am a certified addictions professional and recovery support specialist. And I work as a counselor at 3 different rehabs in West Palm, Palm Beach Institute right down the road, and United Recovery. And what's the third one? Oh, the Beaches Treatment Center. Sorry out there. Very familiar with Rico, where Chris works. I think my thing is I like to talk to the clients from a spiritual perspective. You know, it's not about just putting down the drink and the drug. It's about how we live our lives, how we conduct ourselves, a life of integrity, and courage, and perseverance, and those qualities and virtues that will enhance their recovery. I work very closely with Diana. In fact, I'm a co-founder of Movies Making a Difference, and I basically manage the halfway house or safe house, we call it there. Most of the people that we help are addicts as well. So I counsel them, give them a little life coaching experience, and watch them grow.
Thank you, Rolando. Yeah, so my name is Domenic Esposito, for some of you who don't know me, and I'm an artist and activist, I like to call myself. And I'll talk a little bit about the series, and I'll talk a little about maybe also some of the previous work I've done. So the new series is called Blank Slate, and it really questions this age-old argument around nature versus nurture. You know, is it our environment and culture that makes us who we are, or is it something genetically that we are kind of born with, if you will? I'm more in the camp, and I won't give my cards up, but I'm more in the camp that it's our culture and our environment, and a lot of it has to do with things that we don't even know that it's happening to us, whether it's corporate marketing, it's family that or other parts of our life that create who we are. And with this work, what I'm really talking about here is the loneliness and the isolationism that has come about either through mental health issues that have been caused or not caused by substance use disorder, but has been really kind of accelerated in the last year given COVID-19. We've seen a real acceleration in mental health issues in this country, and really kind of speaks to wanting to recognize that for what it is, and to recognize that there are people out there that are suffering with this, and how I'm not a doctor, I'm an artist, so my position is really to kind of highlight a lot of these issues, and a lot of our panelists here are the experts who really kind of take the cues and really treat people. So my previous work really kind of dealt with the opioid crisis. So I'm the founder of a nonprofit, the Opioid Spoon Project. We've raised national attention by kind of pointing fingers by dropping these 800-pound spoons in front of pharmaceutical companies and government agencies. In fact, we have one of them here, the one we did in front of the FDA. And there are large rallies, we have media there, and it really does point the finger that this is a man-made disease. This isn't something that it's been in this country for 20 years, and the corporations have benefited tremendously, mostly pharmaceutical companies, from it, and it's this big, large web of influence, if you will. So that's been going on for the last 3.5 years with my Opioid Spoon Project, a nationally recognized nonprofit. But I want to take a little bit of time, Ron, if I can, sort of to call out what today is. Today is March 6th, obviously, but it's National Black Balloon Day, and it's a day that we remember all the loved ones that we have lost to the opioid crisis. And there are thousands and thousands of them. And we've met a lot of those families over the last 4 years. So I'm going to take a minute to, maybe we take 60 seconds of silence to just say a prayer and to remember all those loved ones that we have lost to the opioid crisis. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Not only know the problems, but they have real solutions for the problems. And 2020 brought up a lot of issues. So I'm going to ask all of our panelists to talk a little bit about the specific populations that they work with, so that we all get an insight of the type of work and the dedication that these people do, and the access that you will now have by knowing them and know where to send people or get help yourself if you need it. And we're going to start with Chris.
Thanks, Rolando. We at RICO, we had to put things on lockdown, and a lot of people were kind of scared, really scared in the beginning. And actually, Again, my evidence is anecdotal because I'm just giving you the stories of the people that I work with. But I'll give you for instance, we had a client who had completed 60 days of treatment. He was going back to his family, back to Washington. And when he went back, he was forced to quarantine. He tested positive for COVID when he got home, and he was separated from his children. And his ex-wife wouldn't let him see the children, and he was forced to stay isolated inside, couldn't attend outside meetings, couldn't get together with other people who are recovering as well. And this is pretty early on in that recovery process. 60 days actually is not a very long time. And so when he got back there, the only thing he knew to do is he called us up. And at the time we were providing telehealth and Zoom for groups. And he got on there every single day and spent 3 hours a day with us. And to watch the community come together around him, even through this kind of forum, was pretty powerful and special. And even though he was across the country in another state, he felt that love and it got him through. He got through that 2 weeks. He tested negative, and when he came back on after he had seen his children for the first time in a very long time, he was brought to tears because he was so grateful for the group that came around him, even through this medium of Zoom. And so I do believe that, face to face and people being together is obviously, especially with recovering folks, is better, and they get to have that human connection. But the way the treatment centers all around kind of stepped up and said, okay, what can we do to meet this need? What is something that we can do? And Zoom was pretty relatively new, and everybody jumped on board, and they were able to have these groups. And we saw that the AA community, the recovery community outside of the treatment centers, were also doing meetings with people across the world. One of the cool things is we had a client that came on, and he was telling me that he went to a meeting, and he was in a big AA meeting group with somebody who was from Australia telling his story. And he was talking about how he couldn't stand that he'd hurt his family and that they were in pain because of his actions and behaviors. And he said, I felt so just blown away by the fact that the guy was telling the same story that I have, and he's from across the world. So one of the things through the pandemic was the fact that people got connected from across the world because they took the time to go on this. And a lot of them said when they first went on, they kept quiet, they didn't say much, it was a little uncomfortable because it was new and different. But the more that they showed up and the more that they participated, they felt connected on a much deeper level with people that they've never met in their entire lives. And so it was about acting quickly, figuring out what was the way to keep recovering people together, even if they couldn't be in person. And it actually turned out to be pretty amazing. And the ones that struggled when they went back home, it was typically due to the fact that they refused to participate in any kind of internet Zoom type meetings and stuff like that. It was them that really kind of struggled to kind of get back on track and stay on track. And unfortunately, a lot of times wound up relapsing. It's because they didn't, go that extra mile to try to connect with other people. So this medium, this Zoom medium, has been a huge thing for recovering people over the last year. And we jumped on it right away and utilized it as much as possible. In fact, we still utilize it. And then every Thursday night, we have kind of an alumni meeting. And usually we have probably 40 to 50 people on the television screen from across the country that are able to participate. And in the past, they hadn't been able to because they lived, across the country. And now that group has gotten stronger together, even if they are just on the television screen. So it's been a pretty cool thing to see happen. And you're seeing a lot of people that are utilizing that resource and saying, hey, I'm struggling today. Today was a rough day for me. And you watch the other people come together and rally behind them. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you to everyone for, again, being with us tonight, and for honored to be here representing the California area. My story is a little one that is a bit different in terms of the population we serve. I have for years been serving immigrant children, Latino families, primarily Spanish-speaking families that have different mixed status, families that are from agricultural community, farm worker families. And for the first time, 2 years ago, I received a special invitation from a group of activist women here in 2018 when we started seeing the separation of children and families happening at the southern border. And they went out to see what was needed with basic needs and supplies and resources, and then came back and said, we really need to figure out how we're going to help these families, their mental health, being able to journey with them, hear what's happening, and really, as Rolando so well put it, care about them as a person. And one of the messages that they always say when we do art with them, when we do, um, when I ask them, like, what do you want to tell the world? Like, what do you want to tell others that don't know you, but you're here? And they said, they always say, like, todos somos humanos, and which translates that we are all human. And so I have been able to go for 2 years to the southern border when the Remain in Mexico policy was put into place, which meant that asylum seeking families had to wait out on the most dangerous side of Mexico. Matamoros is known for the capital, the murder capital in Mexico. It's really dangerous there. And the rate of murders and kidnappings is high. And so they had families living in tents on the cement, no sanitation supplies, no school, no resources really in the beginning, until kind of NGOs came in and started to say, hey, let's put up some porta potties, let's get everyone a tent, let's get folks some blankets, let's get them food. But in that journey, we saw children for 2 years back and forth. We would go every 3 months, and we saw what this policy and immigration was doing to them. And we also got to hear, for those folks that say, well, why are the parents bringing them here? Why do folks come? Are you sure? We heard every single question, but the reality is that after 2 years and sitting with family after family and the same families for 2 years and talking to them and WhatsApping with them and visiting them and seeing them cry, seeing the flood, if you think about the cold that was just happening in Texas, everybody was worried about, everyone that had a home and what was happening. And I kept thinking, what about the children that are in that tent? There were children that were having hypothermia so bad from the freezing cold. We've seen moments where the flood came, the hurricane, that was almost hitting Texas, almost hitting South Texas, and luckily veered. But the flood that came, and the families that were pushed out from lost everything they had, every little bit that they had, to keep moving the tents up and up and up to higher ground. And then the mosquito wave of mosquitoes that were biting them, and the fear of children and the parents at night, if their children could get kidnapped for ransom, because of the cartel trafficking there. And the mental health of these children and families, to think that they are inhuman, to think that they do not matter, to think that people do not value them or see them or hear their cries. And for what the children, 2 years old, 4 years old, 6 years old, 8 years old, and I got to see little kids grow up for 2 years. Like, there's a little girl that I talk to pretty regularly every week, and she was not 8 years old when I first met her, and then all of a sudden she's 10 years old and she's growing up there. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, for 2 years they didn't have school. And so when people ask, like, all right, why do the parents bring them? Like, why do they come, and how come they put them in those situations? And what people don't understand is that the stories of what they're fleeing from, the danger, the death, the trauma, the realities. We've seen the images, the photos, the evidence, I guess, if people want to hear that, like, of what's happened to their families in their home countries. And so nobody would stay in these conditions at all. No one would live in these conditions unless they could not go home to safety. No one would have lived through what they have gone through. And so I'm actually really proud to say that a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago, Jill Biden, the first lady, went out to the camp, and she visited this Matamoros camp. And we have photos with some of the same families I'm talking about. And she told them, the first thing we're gonna do is take you out of here. I mean, this is no place. If you can imagine the bathroom conditions of a child having to get up at 2 in the morning to go to a porta potty that is, 5 porta potties for hundreds of people, and the danger that's lurking around the corner, like what these children have lived and what they've seen in their eyes. Um, and I know that, that's just a snippet, because going into a lot of detail would really be traumatic for you all to hear, but there's so many stories that we hold for them. And so when that night happened, that the election happened, and the hope was that somehow humanity would be restored, that somehow these children would have a chance to have a life just like me, just like you. Like I'm a mom, and I always say that these children are just like my just like my kids. If this were my children, or maybe if I grew up in Central America and I had to flee, what makes me any different? I was just blessed to be where I was in the day I was born, but things could change. And so luckily, I do want to say to you that um, we just in the last couple of days, the camp was finally closed. President Biden did decide to close the camp. Families are asking for humane asylum with a due process in a safe way. These children, I've gotten to see them coming into the US. And I'm going to tell you a little story that happened just the other day. And our program of ALAs is working with children. I'm a mental health clinician. I understand trauma every which way that you can imagine, but I will say that I've never seen chronic trauma and such societal trauma and racial trauma and undocumented trauma as I've seen in the
NAMI was founded by family caregivers, and we also serve individuals who are living with mental health conditions. Since the pandemic has started, we've received calls beyond that population, or receiving calls from a lot of people who are new to mental health, who are experiencing symptoms for the first time related to COVID stressors. And so we serve primarily adults. We do have a youth program, but for adults, we have one-on-one mentoring, support groups, classes, incredible resources. I put a link in the chat for our Frontline Wellness program. So that's supporting our frontline workers. So potentially some of you all who are on the panel as well, a lot of our workers are also enduring a lot of stress related to COVID and serving others. But at NAMI, what we're seeing is the effects of isolation, losing people, losing your support system, things that across the board, all of us are experiencing. We provide all free services. So we have support groups every week for the caregiver or for the individual, classes for parents of all 8 kids, for family caregivers of adults. We have a lot of great, incredible programs, but we serve many populations.
So I practice individual therapy, and my primary focus is trauma, particularly adult survivors of childhood trauma. Access to mental health is still a challenge. The way that people find me, it depends. Some people are just looking online and they don't really know where to go or who to talk to. And most of the people that call me, I end up trying to give them other resources because they're not sure exactly where to go. And I also wanted to touch on, like Rolando was saying with the LGBTQ community, when he and I were discussing, what I would bring to this panel, we were talking about intimate partner violence, particularly for LGBTQ folks, and how this current crisis has worsened that. So sexual minorities have a lifetime prevalence of intimate partner violence up to 66%. And that's even worse for people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. There are studies that have shown that Black, gay, and bisexual men have rates of intimate partner violence comparable to women of all races. And that includes physical violence and sexual violence. And people who abuse their partners tend to use silence and isolation and secrecy as a weapon. And as you can imagine, that's so much worse for LGBTQ folks and in this pandemic. And so I wanted to just mention the academic Kimberly Crenshaw, who in 1990 coined this term intersectionality, which comments on how people can be multiple minorities at once, so they can be part of multiple groups that experience oppression or discrimination. And so that's what these folks are really facing right now. So homophobia, transphobia, racism can all keep people who are in violent relationships from seeking help. A trans person might not be able to go to a shelter and be placed with people of the same gender where they belong. A person who's trans or Black or a person of color might hesitate to call the police during a violent incident because of police brutality and distrust of the system. And then, of course, with increased isolation, I've read a lot of perpetrators will use the threat of homophobia. Some people haven't told their families that they are in the LGBTQ population, and their partners might threaten to out them to their families and isolate them further. They might not have their regular contacts at work. So someone might see and notice that something is going on with them, that something is terribly wrong for them, and they can't speak out. They can't get away. Maybe they're quarantined with their partner and they can't get away to make a phone call or to tell somebody or to reach out. If they lost their jobs, we know that financial insecurity is a huge risk factor for intimate partner violence and for child abuse as well, especially when we're talking about, trans kids, just LGBTQ kids in general, that financial insecurity, poverty worsens outcomes for all of those populations and increases the risk for violence in families and in partnerships. And so all of these things are even worsened now with the pandemic. Another factor is substance use disorders, as some of my fellow panelists are commenting on. Substance use disorders increase the risk of intimate partner violence. And we've seen increased use of substances with people trying to cope in isolation during this pandemic. So it's just kind of this perfect storm. And then being a victim of this kind of violence also increases one's chance for substance use disorders, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's ending up forming this cycle that's contributing to more violence that we aren't seeing. And, a lot of people are living in silence and isolation, suffering this, and they can't get out and get help. And so I just wanted to, really bring that to light today.
Primarily, we founded the Safeway House as a place for victims that we help through Movies Making a Difference to come on their way to the appropriate program. They will come and they will stay with us at the Safe House. They will go to the appropriate program, and when they're done, they will come back to the Safe House. Oftentimes, they have to go to different types of programs. Most of them will come as drug addicts, but also have PTSD issues as well. So they'll have to go to a couple of different programs, and they'll use the Safe House as sort of a stopping over point. After, I don't know how long they're in, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months in rehab, they'll come back and stay with us while we get them transitioned into normal society, set them up with jobs and living situations and that type of thing. I did want to say one thing, the opioid epidemic is real. People these days are dropping in parking lots. My anecdotes are not particularly happy ones. I can tell you I've watched my best friend die of an overdose, met her working in recovery. She had helped many, many people and got caught up in the pain pills from a surgery. Took her right back to her addiction. She copped some heroin laced with fentanyl one day in a parking lot and died. And I see that all the time. And in rehabs, I also see successes, and that's where we get our greatest satisfaction and gratitude, watching people overcome this. It's been hard with the COVID. A couple of the panelists have talked about the isolation issue, and for an addict, isolation is maybe the #1 problem. You can only watch so much television, I guess, and then I know it's going to make this rerun more exciting. So we've seen the census in the rehabs go up. because of that. And the relapse rate go up because of the isolation. It's been, we've had to change our programs a little bit to accommodate the COVID variable, if that's how you want to put it. So it's been tough, and it's been tough in the safe house as well. We go through some quarantine problems protocol like everybody else does. But again, we've seen our successes and we've seen our failures, and both ends of the spectrum. So the fight goes on, but it's a very real epidemic.
Well, there's no way that we could have reached as many people as we had I just been sitting here on panels and reaching you or on my Facebook page and trying to get them to understand how widespread child slavery is in the United States and sex trafficking. But with the movie, and especially if you make it a feature film, maybe with an uplifting ending, so watching a documentary and just the tragedy of it all, people be horrified and they might just, then want to go and have that drink. Whereas if it's a exciting movie, they get enthralled by it and take it. And then at the end, the good guys win. It makes everyone feel like, well, wait, look how strong that little girl was, or look at that character in there. Maybe I could do something as well. And we won for Audience Choice for Best Feature Film at the Palm Beach International Film Festival. And everyone came out of the theater saying, oh my gosh, what can we do to help? And if I'm just talking to a group of people, everyone says, oh, bravo. Yeah, they're not inspired to go help like movie or art will do. And because of that, I was able to turn it into a nonprofit and use all the funding to go back and help the people. And I always thought if it's wonderful to make a documentary, but I can't imagine of just making the movie and then said, see you all later. You're all on your own, best of luck after you knew what was going on with them. So with the films, we've been able to raise so much money, which I would not have been able to raise on my own without them. So for both senses, it's been really important. And I'm so thrilled to hear about Belinda, what she's doing for those people, because the third movie, because we've been delayed with COVID, having Cult Cartel made, but the third one is Carmelita, and it is talking exactly about the dangers. I wouldn't even call it dangers. As she said, it's the highest murder capital in the world, and mostly for young women. And so it's a murder mystery. And again, hopefully get people to be involved in the excitement of the movie and then learn and then decide they want to do something as well.
What do you want to, what is the call to action with the development of this particular show? I know that the Opioid Spoon Project's call to action was to stop the distribution and the abuses of pharmaceuticals, in so much as Spoon was laid out and actually arrested in that process of drawing attention to ending pharmaceutical abuses of opioids. With Blank Slate, what is your call to action and what are you offering the community?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rolando. I mean, it's a tough one because, we're taking on a big, talking about mental health. There's so many, it's not just substance use disorder, there's isolation, there's all the other, issues that were talked about here at the panel. I think for me, it's really about bringing awareness to our fellow humans that, to have empathy for people out there suffering with it. And it's much more common than we think, especially with COVID-19. It's really kind of accelerated it. I, for one, did some work this summer. I was sort of nominated on this committee to work on the Biden campaign that dealt with enforcing. Well, the committee was trying to coming up with 100-day actions and then first-day actions for Biden. At that point, we didn't know he was going to be president, but we worked really hard on some of these. And I was the only artist on this thing. There's people like here on the panel that were part of it that did a lot of the heavy lifting. But one of the laws that I worked on, was the enforcement of the 2008 parity law, which means that insurance companies pay their fair share with mental health, which a lot of, and it's a state by state, a lot of insurance companies have not been paying for mental health, whether it's substance use, provoked or not, or vice versa. So this law needs to be enforced. So we're talking about potentially, national hotline that could just call up without having this confusing state by state, having attorney generals actually go after the insurance companies. And we're starting to see some of that happen, but it's really only been at a state by state level. So the analogy I sort of talk about, I'll try to be brief with this, whether it's substance use disorder or the opioid crisis in general, I really think if we were to think about where we are now compared to the HIV/AIDS crisis that we saw in the 80s and early 90s, we didn't really see a game changer for that community until 1991 with the Ryan Act. And that was a real game changer. People could, that were affected were able to get real treatment. The stigma started becoming, was erased. And none of that is happening with the opioid crisis. And people say, oh, it's gotten much better. Yes, it's gotten much better in terms of there's a little bit more publicity, but the death rates are still increasing. This year we saw 82, last 2020, we saw 82,000 deaths. I think addiction is on the rise tremendously in this country. And, and my fellow panelists have seen it as well. I think we're in 1985, if I were to compare the two crises, right? And I know there's a lot of, there's not a lot of similarities, but there are in terms of the stigma, the amount of deaths. And we still have a long way to go. I think we're in in the first inning of trying to get some real change in this country. And it's going after, little things like enforcing the parity law. But we really do need a big Ryan Act type law and legislation passed in this country.
Well, thank you. I had a tough 2020 because my business was slow. It was quarantine, everything. There was a lot of divisiveness in the country. I had a lot of friends that were turning on each other, treating people poorly. And I had all but survived 2020. And I was so looking forward to the end of the year to celebrate Thanksgiving with my family. And on Thanksgiving, the first of 3 of the matriarchs in my family passed away, one right after the other. As a recovering addict who was in isolation, living alone, I was getting into a very dark state. And if I told you that wanting to give up didn't cross my mind, and I didn't sit with that thought for a while, I'd be lying to you. And I don't know if it was by the grace of God that Chris mentioned Zoom. I detested Zoom by the end of the year because everybody was Zooming and Zooming and Zooming. And everybody was criticizing Facebook because of all the divisiveness and sharing. But suddenly the Zoom calls started coming in. The dings wouldn't stop. And I had to drag myself out of bed. And I looked at what the dings were. And the dings were notes of condolences. They were messages to call people, asking me about my welfare. Then I struggled to answer the door, and somebody was delivering flowers, and someone was delivering food. And there was an awakening that took place that I woke up and realized I live in the world that I was hoping for all along. I just wasn't looking nor setting the space for it. But there was so much empathy out there for my loss. Then I started crying. I was very happy. I was hundreds of people from all over the world And I thought to myself that day, there's 450,000 families that are mourning more than 450,000 deaths. And if all of them are getting 1 or 2 bouquets of flowers, 1 or 2 wonderful empathic messages, that's the world I want to live in, you know? And I got up, took a shower, called my job and said, I'm coming to work. I feel okay to go to work. And yeah, social media works. And social media saved me this past holiday. And you never know who's next to you. And this is why this is so important. Yes, it's about the art. And the art is beautiful. You know, it's just like a writer who could write a beautiful structured sentence. But unless it says something, and unless it means something, it's just a pretty sentence. The context of this show is about addiction, is about some of the darkest things that we go through in our lives. But it's also about the results, the solutions, the happiness that all of these people bring. The first time I met Chris, I was broken. It was 11 years ago. And he was my first counselor. The only reason I ended up talking to Diana is because I know the population she was talking about. Vasilia. If it wasn't for people like her, half of the people that I live with and that I run around with would have committed suicide by now. Because my friends are all from the LGBT community. And if Dominic wouldn't have had that spoon 2 years ago at an art exhibit, it wouldn't have crossed my attention that my family, like him, suffered. What touched me was that he did this work as a response to the impotence that he felt because his brother's addiction, and the power that he got from knowing and having a purpose that he could be of help. Maybe not to his brother directly, but to the pandemic and the epidemic of opioid abuse. So art has power, and it brings us all together on Facebook, live, in the audience. And I want to welcome you all, and I hope that you come back for the opening reception next week. And on the 12th, we will be screening Cathedral Canyon. So a round of applause for all of our speakers. And in signing off, I want everybody to be able to say how we could get in touch with you.
You can go on our website. It's recointensive.com. That's RECO intensive.com. Give us a call. Our cell phone numbers are on there. You can call us anytime.
Diana Davis, how do we get in touch with you?
On our website, moviesmakingadifference.org. And there's join us, volunteer, whatever you want to do. We need you.
Catherine, how would people get in touch with you all the way in Canada?
You can get in touch with us in Palm Beach County at namipbc.org. I put the link in the chat on Facebook and on Zoom.
Belinda, all the way in California, if we know of any families that need your service, we have a lot of friends that are constantly going to help immigrant families. If they need to get in touch with you, how would they reach you?
Yes, I just shared the link to our website, and my email is belinda@alasdreams.com. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Vasilia, how do people get in touch with you?
I would say the best way is to go to my Instagram, which is at Juno Counseling, JUNO Counseling. And I say that because it's a free resource, but I provide a lot of mental health tips about trauma, especially childhood trauma. And if you're interested in the homeless population, Vita Nova Inc. helps homeless youth, a wonderful place to volunteer here in West Palm. But the mobile crisis unit in here in West Palm Beach is a really great resource from South County Mental Health Center. And the 211 number is another excellent resource. And that's something you can call 24 hours a day, especially if there's a crisis or something is escalating, or if you just need community resources to start to try to, get to the bottom of what's going on or get her some help.
All righty, well, that is a wrap for tonight. We will see you all Friday night at Movies Making a Difference, the screening for Cathedral Canyon. And next Saturday is the grand opening reception for Blank Slate with Domenic Esposito. Until then, have a nice evening.